It's the week ending Saturday the 13th of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Emmanuel Macron elected President of France, President Trump sack the head of the FBI, and Stephen Fry narrowly avoid a charge of blasphemy in Ireland. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And with me today from the week's digital team are Rebecca Gillie, Jamie Timson and Holden Frith. And to start the show with his top pick of the week, it is Holden. What have you brought with you?
Well, Macron isn't the only new president working out what to do about the awkward neighbours.
Mr. Moon used to serve for a president that comes from Sunshine Policy School. This is the idea that believes in more economic concessions to North Korea, engaging with Pyongyang. So I wonder how much of an alignment that Mr. Moon could have with the U.S. president when he's trying to put North Korea in check directly or indirectly by involving China.
CNBC's Sherry Kang, somewhat hesitantly, reporting this week on the results from the presidential election in South Korea. So, Holden, let's break this down. What does President Moon mean for relations with, well, North Korea is the most important one, isn't it? And then, I guess, America, and then us.
And China as well, I'd add into that cocktail. It means that he's going to try to engage more with North Korea. He replaces President Park, who is from the conservative side of South Korean politics. She was very much in alignment with the US policy of trying to isolate North Korea. She had reached a deal which allowed the US to station a missile system called THAAD on South Korean territory. That was quite unpopular with a lot of South Koreans, very unpopular with China. They saw it as an act of aggression, even though both the US and South Korea insisted it was a defensive act. The new president, President Moon, had said during the campaign that he would reconsider whether those missiles would be allowed in South Korea. He's also generally much less enthusiastic about the military alliance with the US, which is quite extensive. There's 28,500 American troops in South Korea.
Well, more than that, and we heard the reference, didn't we, in that report to the Sunshine Policy. Now, that was, sort of 10, 15 years ago or something, yes, when South Korea had a policy of dealing with North Korea.
Yeah. The new president was chief of staff to the president who introduced the Sunshine Policy, so he was instrumental in implementing that first time round. It's quite likely that he'll want to try something similar. What that actually involved in practice was relatively limited, but had some interesting effects. So there was some jointly run factories in a North Korean city called Kaesun. This involved South Korean management and technology being set up in North Korea and working with ordinary North Koreans who therefore got the experience of working in a modern factory, being paid regular wages and eating some limited examples of South Korean food, including a chocolate bar called the Choco Pie.
Okay, so North Koreans might get to eat Choco Pie once again, but at the moment it's not even being reported in North Korea, I understand, that they have a new president in South Korea.
There's been official silence on the matter. The North Korean analysts believe that his regime will probably be pleased by this result, but officially they haven't said anything at all.
So, Jamie, Rebecca, I know this podcast is all about throwing light into areas of the news that perhaps aren't getting the coverage they deserve, but had you been following the election in South Korea?
Well, I actually did write a piece about it, so I'm kind of slightly au fait with the basic facts. And I think what Holden was saying
Wow, you slapped me down there. I wasn't suggesting you weren't, I was just asking.
You can't catch me out.
I actually wrote an article based on Rebecca's article as well.
So we have a very similar shared base of knowledge on this, I imagine.
And did you think President Moon was going to win?
Yeah, he went in with the double-digit lead over his nearest rival, and he won by the widest margin in modern South Korean history. So he was pretty much a favourite going in, although a lot of that was based on his other policies. Most South Koreans, were most concerned about limiting corruption and increasing opportunities for ordinary people. National security wasn't necessarily the top.
President Park had been impeached. That was the reason that Moon was coming in, was that she had there were huge corruption ties between big business and her regime.
Yeah, and
alleged corruption ties at the moment. She is in prison awaiting trial.
That's true. And yes, North Korea was certainly from what indications we've got, obviously it's very difficult for them to report the election because they don't want their own people to hear about people having democratic elections. But the state newspaper did urge South Koreans to vote for Moon on the basis that this could be the beginning of an eventual reunification process, which has actually become steadily less popular in South Korea as young people are growing up with no kind of cultural memory of there being unified Korea.
It seems like the idea for reunification really has come from the older generations who once had an idea of what a unified Korea was like. Moon himself said last month that if he had a crystal ball, he would show his 90-year-old mother what her North Korean hometown looked like and how her relatives there were faring. If Korea unifies, the first thing I would do is take my mother's hand and visit her hometown. Perhaps I could retire there as a lawyer, he said. This is the world that they've grown up in, the divide.
And also because of technology as well, this might just be a sort of cliched tech journalist view of things, but the way I understand it, South Korea, home of Samsung and all the rest of it, actually is so far advanced of most other nations in that part of the world, and indeed most of the world, that it's an even bigger divide between the haves and the have-not now.
Definitely. And what's interesting is I saw a graphic that measured the different demographics of South Koreans, how they felt towards reunification, what they thought the obstacles would be. And among the older generation, a very small number, I think something in the 20s, said that the ideological side of North Korea would be an obstacle to reunification, whereas their chief concern was the economics, the fact that North Korea is so underdeveloped in comparison, what a burden it would be to try and integrate so many people into a unified Korea, whereas the younger generation rated that much lower, and their chief problem was the ideological implications of trying to unify the country.
I think also, as far as my reading of the election went, South Koreans were voting in President Moon almost because they felt like they had to, rather than particularly because they backed his policies. Analysts say that young South Koreans see the system as being quite rigged towards the rich and the powerful. Young South Koreans are twice as likely to be unemployed as the older generation. And this is obviously has parallels across the world for situations, but they wanted change, and they voted in their change candidate, who it seems was President Moon.
And Holden, we're tossing around the phrase, reunited Korea, like this is something that's actually happening. Presumably that is still a very unlikely outcome of all of this.
Extremely unlikely. The differences you talked about are technological, as you said, but also they've become physiological. North Koreans are, on average, reportedly 2 inches shorter than South Koreans because of the diet there, because of the poor healthcare that's available. The huge numbers of North Koreans have starved to death. There seems to be very little common ground between the two, which is why the Sunshine Policy, experimenting with this sort of limited economic engagement, was such a significant policy.
There's also, I suppose, I know we look at the footage of sort of North Koreans going mental when, any of the Kims steps out, and almost laugh at it because it just seems ridiculous, the hysteria that's generated. But if you've grown up with that propaganda as the only thing you've ever known, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Presumably there's many North Koreans who have no curiosity or knowledge about what goes on outside and genuinely would be heartbroken if that dynasty fell apart. One
of the reasons I mentioned the choco pies earlier, to bring it back to the chocolate question, that seemed to break through the ideology. So the managers were bringing in these chocolate bars to use as rewards for Employee of the Month type contests, and also just a token of friendship. But because they were by far the most delicious and exotic thing that many North Koreans had ever eaten, they became incredibly highly valued. They were changing hands for $10, which in a country where the average income is somewhere between $150 and $200 a month is a significant amount of money. They were essentially being used as an illicit currency, and soldiers started demanding choco pies as bribes instead of cash. Where at one point reportedly 150,000 a day of these chocolate bars were being distributed through the factory in Kaesung. And I think that goes to show that these limited engagements can actually have wide-ranging and unexpected effects. And a lot of North Koreans, as a result of that, will think of South Korea and associate it with chocolate and an act of generosity rather than whatever Kim Jong-un is telling them to think about it.
You were saying earlier about how North Koreans are, generally shorter than South Koreans because they have a poorer diet. The thing with the Sunshine Policy is that when it was instituted, in 1998, that was the height of the famine in North Korea, the arduous march. A lot of people think now that millions may have died, but at least 500,000 died during that time. And the Sunshine Policy involved, part of it was shipping billions of dollars of food and aid over the border to try and kind of soften the regime a little bit towards the idea of first de-escalating their weapons program and maybe eventual reunification. So if the Sunshine Policy didn't work then, when North Korea was really quite desperate compared even to now.
There's another worry with the Sunshine Policy, which is, so critics say that by reducing North Korea's economic dependence on Beijing, by giving them food and aid and everything, it basically strengthens Kim Jong-un's hand by giving him more of an ability to continue on his war path or whatever he. It
is a really difficult question. To what extent does engagement benefit the people, and to what extent does it benefit the regime? I think one way in which Moon may be able to cut through a bit of that dynamic, particularly with China, is that it actually centres on the missile defence system. Because he is on the record as being sceptical about it, China wants rid of it. That may prove to be something of a bargaining chip, allowing him to do a deal between Trump and China and himself that enables at least the three big powers in the region to have a united front in a way that they haven't had for the past decade.
So we could see the de-escalation of World War III. Jamie, if you have a more significant story than that, you win Choco Pie. What are you bringing to the table?
Doing my best Adam Curtis impression. This is the story of how a shadowy cabal took over the world.
In the simplest form, the more you know about someone, the more you can align a campaign with their requirements or their wants and needs. So at a very basic level, we try and take a really very vast quantity of demographic, consumer and lifestyle data, and we blend that with psychographic data, which is a modeling of personality, to start to be able to target and communicate with people about the things that they really, really care about, but more importantly, possibly in a way that resonates with their personalities.
Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, and rumour has it the next Bond villain. Jamie, they claim to have swung the election for Trump and Brexit. Who are they, and why have you brought them up today?
So this past Sunday, there was an article in The Observer by Carol Cadwallader, which was a kind of the culmination of a long investigation that her and a few people have done into this company called Cambridge Analytica, whose parent company is difficult to find out because of their subsidiaries and everything, but it seems to be a group called SCL. They are, first and foremost, a behavioural analytics company. I am wary of going into it in too much detail, so I would just say read the article. But there are facts such as Leave.eu, which is slightly more right-wing of the two Leave referendum campaigns. They spent some of their £7 million budget. They spent somewhere in the region of £3.9 million on a company called Aggregate IQ, who have huge connections with Cambridge Analytica to target certain voters with advertising that was very specific to each person. Targeted advertising isn't actually such a new concept, but what
not least on this podcast.
Yeah,
we talked about it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
It was all jolly good fun then, if I recall correctly. Why is it suddenly all sinister and weird?
And everyone came away thinking, "Oh, isn't Channel 4 lovely? Oh, they've got my name in the thing."
Right.
But actually, what Aggregate IQ did was focus on the behavioural values of a voter and target them with very specific adverts.
Well, like what, though? Because, you can do that, can't you? If someone buys The Sun, you have a good idea of roughly what their values are and what kind of TV programmes they watch. What's the difference?
So in order to understand a voter's profile, the company bought data from across the spectrum. So airlines, because it's an American company, in America, you have to opt out if you don't want people to use your data, personal data, whereas in the EU, you have to opt in. But they basically were able to profile people based on anything to do with what they were buying, any kind of, how you leave a trace on the internet or whatever. And they found out that, say, you were really neurotic as a person, you looked at anxiety drugs or anything like that, but you also had issues with maybe perhaps immigration or something, they would then target the ads to focus on your issue with immigration. What was interesting with Trump particularly was that they found that those people that wanted to buy American-produced cars were far more likely to be a potential Trump voter.
But all of the attack ads and everything, I mean, we were seeing them in the UK on YouTube. They're all over my social media platform. So it's not as if, you may get this degree of targeting to add an extra layer of, you really, really, really do want to vote for Trump. But there's still a generic base level, isn't there, where they're taking out full page ads in the newspapers and they're on the telly. It's just another strand of advertising, isn't it?
I suppose the problem with it is we don't know that those adverts were the only ones produced. The nature of advertising through social media is that there could be an entire shadow campaign going on that we don't hear about. I'm moderately sceptical about quite a lot of the claims in the article.
Such as
the extent to which being able to profile people based on behaviour actually gives you all that much more useful information than you could get from the kind of newspapers that they buy and their postcode, where they live, that sort of information that's been around before. But although I'm sceptical, I would like to know more about what's going on. And I think part of the problem is that so much of this does happen in the shadows. It's actually just quite difficult to evaluate, firstly, what Cambridge Analytica are actually doing, and then secondly, what effect that might be having on voting patterns.
Yeah, I'm with Holden on this. How much of this is new and innovative and how much of it is just corporate waffle? I mean, that clip we listened to, and you break it down, he didn't really say much. Obviously, it serves Cambridge Analytica's purposes to sound very mysterious and all-knowing. I mean, you don't sound that sinister unless you're doing it deliberately. They've obviously chosen that that's the image they want to portray. Is it really anything that we haven't seen already online with data gathering?
In 2013, SCL had a contract with the Trinidad and Tobago government. It was a proposal to capture citizens' browsing history en masse, recording phone conversations and applying natural language processing to the recorded voice data to construct a national police database, complete with scores for each citizen on their propensity to commit crime. So it was pre-crime kind of Minority Report, and that's the parent company of Cambridge Analytica. So they have in the past gone further than just profiling. And the fact that they won't reveal what they're doing or who they work for should kind of ring alarm bells in everyone's head.
Is that just because they're not doing very much, though? I think
yes, that sounds crazy. To spend £3.9 million of your £7 million budget on a company, you've got to believe. So the man behind it, this guy called Robert Mercer, is a kind of computer scientist and had started up a hedge fund. He seems to be, along with Steve Bannon, who worked on the board of Cambridge Analytica, seems to be the brains behind the initiative as a computer scientist. He himself has spent $15 million on this company and on this plan, and people that know him suggest that he wouldn't be spending that money if it was just nonsense.
Couldn't we actually celebrate the fact that this is a British-based company that is now the first port of call for, any election campaign around the world that wants to invest their money in targeted advertising? I mean, what's wrong with that? Isn't it just a sort of digital version of one of the big advertising agencies?
I do remember before the US presidential election, there was a huge amount of derision, really, about Cambridge Analytica and the claims of what they could do. Partly, I think, because they were British, and British polling hasn't had the greatest of reputations in recent years. If 100,000 people in the Midwest had voted for Clinton rather than Trump and she had ended up the winner, I doubt we'd now be reading articles such as these saying that Cambridge Analytica are kind of our...
But they targeted, that was their big point, was that they told Trump to target the Midwest and the Rust Belt as a potential place for... the reason that 100,000 people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton could be because of...
Could be. Yeah, and the difficulty is there are probably 50 different reasons why a different set of 100,000 people voted one way or another.
And also, I mean, obviously, the fact that if you have a lot of money behind your campaign, you can afford to work with Cambridge Analytica suggests that this favours the right wing, as you were saying, especially when you look at their investors and all the rest of it. But the technology itself, which is basically sort of crowd gathering source and data... that doesn't favour right or left, does it? There's no reason why there couldn't be a Wikipedia version of this, which actually ends up targeting more left-wing parties because you're talking to people.
And Obama was widely celebrated for his data operation and grassroots operation 8 years ago.
Until Clinton employed his advisor and then showed it was all nonsense. Right, Rebecca, what have you got for us this week?
This is a new BBC drama about a crime that's had a disturbing afterlife.
9 men have been released on bail.
How many victims?
47. And when they went to the police, nothing was done about it.
No one bothered.
What do you think that does to a kid?
We treat them as human beings and we say we're sorry.
This entire operation stands and falls on us being able to re-engage these girls.
What is the point if a jury is not going to believe she's telling the truth?
I watched her interviews and I believed her.
Let's stop this. You and me.
3 Girls on BBC One.
A trailer launched this week for 3 Girls, a new drama for BBC One, which starts on Tuesday evening. So, Rebecca, what's this drama about, and why have you chosen it as your story of the week?
So this is about a case from 2012 in which 9 men from the Pakistani community and 1 also from Afghanistan in Rochdale were imprisoned after they were involved in a sex exploitation gang which targeted white girls in Rochdale. It was one of several high-profile grooming cases. If you remember from the time, there was another case in Rochdale. There was also a high-profile case in Rotherham. It's being turned into a BBC drama which focuses on the girls' experiences and also on the efforts of social workers to try and raise attention to the fact that these crimes are going on. It was kind of overlooked and ignored. The girls were often from vulnerable backgrounds, such as foster care, and so they tended to be overlooked by the authorities. And
the accusation was that's because of political correctness. Essentially, the local communities didn't want to get involved in it because it focused around Asian men against white women.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously no one has seen this programme yet. It starts next week.
Yeah, there's been no previews available for journalists or anything.
No, but the writer Nicole Taylor did an interview with The Guardian earlier this week in which she wanted to kind of dismiss the idea that her script could inflame racial tensions, which obviously was what happened in the aftermath of these crimes coming to light. She said that the right wing will latch on to anything to try and exploit it for their own purposes, but she didn't think that her script did that. And from what we've seen from the trailer and based on that interview, it's definitely going down the road of like Maxine Peake stars as the social worker who was instrumental in bringing the case to light, and it's about the girls and how they were overlooked and why they were overlooked rather than the actual crimes themselves. But I would say my concern or my question with it would be, is there a way that you can tell this story that doesn't fuel the right wing? A lot of people have been comparing the drama to The Moorside, which aired earlier this year, which is about the Shannon Matthews case.
Which was excellent, wasn't it?
Which was excellent.
And had a similar controversy before it.
Yes,
this is trivialising what happened to Shannon Matthews.
And that had, that wasn't a racial, religious thing, but it had that class tension, how she was overlooked compared to Madeleine McCann from a middle-class family. But from my perspective, it's not the same at all, for the reason that The Moorside, when that aired, the controversy around it had died down, and it was just like, okay, enough time's passed for us to re-examine this case that caused all this controversy. That's never happened with these cases. Muslim grooming gangs has become the buzzword of the far right, not just in the UK but in the US. Breitbart News has a whole tag page under the tag Muslim grooming gangs. The EDL talks about it on Twitter every day. It's a meme of the right wing across the Western world now. Is that the furore has never died down. In fact, if anything, it's gathered momentum over the years.
But that's because it is an important story that resonates with people, isn't it? It is, if you were to zoom out and say what were the kind of defining, domestic news stories of the last decade, it would be there, wouldn't it be, in the top 10 or 20 stories that people remember. So it's right, isn't it, that the public service broadcaster examines it, albeit through drama, not necessarily through documentary, but there's something about it on the telly. Otherwise, they're ignoring it too.
Well, I would say the afterlife that the story has had is not connected to the crime itself. It's become so ingrained in this wider Islamophobic, anti-Muslim drive. It's become like, if you follow the right wing online, which I admit I do in a kind of hate-watching sort of way, you see that it's brought up time and time again as it's basically become, if you look at online far-right communities, symbolic of the Islamification of Europe and how, European countries are crumbling under, this Muslim invasion. Like, that you can't detach that story, I don't think, now from that afterlife that it's had.
I think that, while it's completely true that this has taken its own dimensions and has been taken on by the right wing, I just don't see a reason for not telling the story or not focusing on what is clearly quite a big issue about how these girls, and particularly that character played by Maxine Peake, was let down not only by her employers but by society. And I think that we get into the realms of refusing to talk about issues if we start censoring ourselves by saying, oh, I'm sorry, but these people have taken this whole story on, so let's not fuel their fire anymore.
It's particularly acute, that question, in this case, because that's really how the problem developed and deepened, was people being reluctant to fuel those sorts of far-right views of Muslim men, which meant that the few Muslim men who were committing these crimes were allowed to get away with them for a very long time, and a lot of girls suffered as a result of it. So then suggesting that that story is off limit for drama really seems to be adding an insult to that very deep injury.
Yeah, I mean, I know this, Rebecca, from doing phone-in radio programmes. If you have a community on social media who feel marginalised, I know it seems ridiculous that the white working class might feel like that compared to Pakistanis in Rotherham, but they do. If you take that community and they're telling you, well, why aren't you talking about this? And then you respond by not talking about it, it does actually make it worse, perhaps, than talking about it.
The thing is that it strikes me that what's happening, from again going back to the interview with the writer Nicole Taylor, is it's trying to strike a kind of almost like a false idea that you can seal off the discussion neatly, where she's trying to say we're not going to be suggesting there was any kind of religious or racial motivation, we're not going to be focusing on the crime itself, whereas you can do that if you're writing a column or even a book. It's very easy to seal off the discussion and say why were these girls ignored. And the drama certainly looks like it's taking the route of they were ignored because of their backgrounds, rather than because of political correctness, etc. But I think it's telling that one of the things that Taylor said was that she didn't think the story should be told as a documentary because it can be intimidating. Some people are put off by documentaries, and it's better told as drama where it reaches a wider audience, which kind of leaves the question, then you can't seal off the issues that neatly. If you're going to tell the story, if you're going to fictionalize it, you have to tell the whole story. You can't just focus on the issue that you're trying to bring awareness to. How are they going to deal with the crime itself?
I would much prefer a documentary kind of Panorama style, which they have done on these kind of issues. I think drama...
But no one watches Panorama, not by comparison with the BBC One drama. I mean, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, but I think
that's Rebecca's point too, obviously.
I think it really complicates and shrouds the whole thing in an issue of, like, once you have a director and a writer and actors' takes on people's lives, we end up in a realm of where miscommunication can become quite quickly a problem.
But however it's done, it's likely to cause some upset. But that may not be a bad thing. This is an upsetting case. And it may just be that we have to go through this kind of uncomfortable process. If there's going to be any sort of good to come out of it, or at least some sort of feeling of resolution, there is going to be discomfort on the way.
Yeah, there is going to be discomfort.
And drama will kind of engender that more effectively, and that actually might be a good thing.
Yes, but I mean, and I'm proceeding delicately because obviously it's a difficult subject, and without meaning to demean the experiences of the victims or minimize the crime. At the same time, if you look at the representation of British Asians, especially of Muslims in culture, in our popular culture, in the media generally, there aren't a lot out there.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? I wonder, I was thinking as you were saying all this, would you be saying this if this was a drama about Catholic priests who abuse children?
No, of course not.
And probably the answer is no, because the depiction of white men in society is really not that skewed.
Yeah, we've got that plurality.
Exactly. So the context is the thing, isn't it? That there aren't many positive British Asian role models in other dramas, and to me that's a separate issue, isn't it, than this particular programme?
It is. I mean, that's a wider issue, and obviously, it's hard to talk about that without sounding like you're minimising the crime and the importance of the story, which I do agree is an important story that I think is going to make a very kind of compelling, thought-provoking drama, but I don't think it can be entirely overlooked. I just don't think we have those positive portrayals to balance out such, this is a very high-profile BBC One. You don't really see British Asians on TV very much. One of the TV drama events of the year, in all likelihood, is going to feature British Asians as the villains, even if it is taken from true life. But at the same time, there are millions of British Asians out there who have not and are not going to commit any crimes, and who are not portrayed in the media.
Well, there's been a shift in that too, though, I would say. I mean, it's true that there aren't sort of hero characters particularly played by British Asians generally. But it just as a casual viewer of, I watch a lot of police procedurals, things like Broadchurch, there's very clearly been a drive to have more ethnic minority characters on screen who just work for the police or just happen to be in the background.
True. But I think it's I think that the Asian community is actually kind of lost out in that race compared to, say, I think you see black British actors a lot more, despite the fact that they make up a smaller percentage overall of the population. I don't know if that's something to do with kind of aping America, but when you look at a lot of British Asian actors have spoken out in recent years about this exact subject, and how when they do get high-profile roles, it's as fundamentalists or terrorists or, something to do with their religion.
To be fair, if the Asian fundamentalist role went to a white man, that really would be...
That is true.
That really would be problematic.
But people like Riz Ahmed have gone to the States to pursue different opportunities.
Well, to play a role where he was perhaps a terrorist and perhaps not. Which was great, by the way. That HBO show was amazing.
It's interesting you should raise that idea of having a white man playing a terrorist. I was reading a profile of a young Asian actor a couple of years ago and it had his CV, and on stage he'd been in various Shakespearean roles, he'd done a Pinter play or two, and then his film and TV credits were first terrorist, second jihadi. Maybe he can now add child abuse to that illustrious CV. But I think the answer to that problem is not to avoid telling this story, it is to broaden out the kind of stories that we tell. Maybe it's costume dramas that we should be trying to stamp down on, not modern dramas.
Or even just giving the voice to more black and ethnic minorities in to be able to create their own. Obviously this is a white kind of, but the director's right, the writer's white. But if the BBC said, "Hang on a minute, and I'm sure they are focusing and giving resources to British Asian voices, then we would see greater inclusion of British Asians in primetime TV.
Are you going to be watching it, yes or no, Rebecca?
Oh, absolutely.
Jamie?
Yeah.
Holden?
I probably won't, actually. I think after a day working with news, I just want something a bit more escapist in the evening.
Fair enough. No, good answer. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to be watching it, though, so that's 3/4 of us. And I feel reassured by the fact it's on Auntie BBC, don't you? At the end of the day, talking about will it be sensitively handled?
Better than if it was on Sky.
Yeah, exactly. It's not on Living, is it? Right, my thanks to Rebecca Gillie, Jamie Timson and Holden Frith. That is it for this edition of The Week Unwrapped. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, download our free iPhone app, The Weekday, or you can get the magazine direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. And remember, you can hear this every week. Yes, The Week Unwrapped delivered to your phone. It's easy. Just hit subscribe on your podcast app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby and the producer is Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.